We're working on a Subaru Forester out of an '04 Forester. We took this transmission apart in another video. We did the valve body. Both of those are going to be linked down below. Let me show you what we do, how we put these drums together, and let's get into this. Parts that go into the Forester rebuild. We have our upgraded IPT clutch packs. This 2.4 clutch is going to give you 6 frictions instead of the 5 that comes with at the factory. Our high clutch also goes from 5 frictions to 6 frictions. Obviously, all new clutches and steels for your other the other 4 clutch packs. High stall torque converter, modified valve body, and obviously the rest of the rebuild kit: gasket, seals, filter, 2 filters, and a low clutch piston, which is a high failure part that we like to change no matter what. The first thing we're going to need to do is machine the 2.4 brake piston. And we're only going to establish clearance in the clutch pack. So typically you have to take about 30 thousandths of an inch off of this. Now that we've machined this, the next step that I like to do is to put this drum inside the transmission. Now we're dealing with an empty case here, obviously. Now we could put our piston in. I haven't put the rubber seals on or anything like that. And now we're going to put this clutch pack together so we could measure clearance. And what we're looking for is between 30 and 45 thousandths of an inch. Okay, so we could just get our 30 in here. All right, the first thing that I like to do is to put our rubber seals on all our clutch pistons. And these are marked. If you haven't done this before, it's going to tell you, like, hey, this is for your high clutch drum. You want to be careful that these are in there straight and they're not rolled or anything like that. And if any of that stuff doesn't go together easily while you're putting it together, stop and rewind a little bit and see what's wrong, because everything should go together very easily if you did it right. Okay, this is your input reverse piston, and this is your high clutch piston, and in the transmission they sit like this. Now the difference on this between this and all the other seals, you could see there's a back cut. This surface is shorter than this surface, and that's because this takes a lip seal. So the base of the lip is going to go in here. Then the rest of it is going to protrude out. And the rule with lip seals, you always want your lip facing fluid pressure. So like in other words, your fluid pressure is down here and it's pushing that lip open. Pressure actually opens it and creates a better seal. Okay, the next step is I get my mixture of STP and transmission fluid, and I coat both surfaces, the inside of the drum that it's going to go into and the rubber seals themselves. And this is a real fast way to do it, and it works really well. The stuff goes together very easily with this. We have that done. You make sure everything's in there straight, and you push, and the stuff should go right together. And this has a lip seal, so it's helpful sometimes to turn it as you push down. And when it's down all the way, you should be able to turn it freely like that. And you also have to line this up. This tooth has to be even with a groove here, or you're not going to be able to put the clutches in once it's assembled. And this is a double function drum. It's your reverse input and your high and low reverse. I mean, your reverse input and your high clutch. We have a return spring, and we also have a balance piston. And what a balance piston does is trap centrifugal oil. If you have oil in this clutch drum and these clutches are not applied, that oil can centrifuge, especially if a high RPM application. It centrifuges to the outside of the drum, and it could start partially applying this piston and burn your clutches while it's not on. So these balance pistons also have oil underneath them. So when that centrifuges, it goes to the outside and it pushes it back in the other direction. So what you end up is something that's kind of neutral, where it's neither trying to apply it nor trying to push it off. Same type of deal here. We have a return spring and a balance piston. And now we're going to compress these. You want to make sure you push down straight too, because this is also a piston with a lip seal that we're dealing with. Now once it's in, if you could move it like that, you know it's in all the way. If we could zoom in a little bit, we could see we have these little tabs, and that kind of holds that snap ring from being able to come out. So you want it set just like this. I just like to hang them there for a while so they don't drip while I'm putting everything back together. We're going to get rid of some of these clutch plates by putting these drums together. This is your transfer clutch, which is obviously gives you your all-wheel drive. line the teeth up after they're in. These are your low clutches, which come on when you put the car in forward. There's a cushion spring on the bottom of this, right? And if you see the way it goes, it's facing up this way. So it's sitting in here like a cone. And if you notice on here, there's a second snap ring groove. So there's an identical snap ring to this one that's going to come into play later. But obviously you want to use a lower snap ring when you're putting the clutch pack together. Now there's two sets of clutches for this rod. And our setup is a little revised, so we have two steel plates at the bottom. And then we've had a whole bunch of steel plates manufactured that are thinner so we can get more frictions in here. And in these we use exity clutches for the most part. You know, that depends on the clutch drum, but exity is the brand that's we recommend for the shifting clutches. These are your input reverse clutches. Now we have a cushion spring in here. Actually, it sits the opposite. It sits as a bowl and not a cone. There's only two frictions in here. This is your driving clutch in reverse. Now that we have that done, we want to check our clutch clearances. All right, next we're going to sub-assemble some of this stuff. Bearing race that goes here, bearing on the other side. And this goes into your low clutch drum. That sounds tells us that it's all the way down. Gets a bearing race here on this Planetary. And this bearing is a thicker one. It's kind of unique, different than the other bearings. Sun gear goes in. There's no race. This is a hardened surface that it can ride against. Once we get these splined together, then we put in the snap ring that I told you guys about before. And this is going to go into the top groove. Now here we're going to have another bearing. Clutch hub sits on top. We have another bearing that goes in here. All right, so when we reverse all this, and take note of how these things go. There's two sides to it, so this larger part is going to go towards the bottom. Make sure all our bearings are nice and tight. And that's down all the way. Now the rest of these bearings aren't going to come into play until later. In this transfer clutch we have a cage bearing, and I put a good amount of trans goo on it because that's going to want to fall out on us. We don't need to do this now, but just to show you guys how it goes. Another bearing here. Now that's down all the way. Next thing we need to do is our pump. And these are pretty easy. A little mixture here. Outer gear and an inner gear. Obviously the little lip on the inner gear has to face down into the pump. And you just kind of put a little grease here so it pulls a vacuum when you start it up. But that's not too much of a lubricant. This is a little bit better. There's two dowel pins that locate this. So you want to be careful you have it down on there. Otherwise, if it's not straight, you might damage them. Those two longer bolts. And then you have 5 shorter ones. Our torque specification is 20 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to put our low reverse piston in. And these are something I recommend always changing. It's a lip seal, so you got to kind of work it in. Next, we have a return spring and a retainer. And I like to put a couple studs that we made on here because it has to index specifically in one position. You can see there's an oil feed hole there. And what we have to do is get a couple of these bolts started. And you want to bring this down slowly and evenly, or it could get jammed up in there and it's a bad thing. Take our studs out. And we're going to want to take a look and make sure that all this stuff is down in here evenly. It looks good. So now we're going to put the rest of these bolts in and we're going to torque them to 20 foot-pounds. Another thing you want to watch for, there's a sealing ring that rides right in here. So you want to make sure that that all looks nice and it's not grooved up. So it's this sealing ring from your transfer shaft. Next to the low reverse frictions and steels, we have another cushion, and that sits like a bowl. And the pressure plate goes on top. All right, what's important to note is there's different thickness frictions and different thickness steels, and there's also different amounts of frictions and steels depending on if it's a turbo, non-turbo, etc. The important thing is to make sure that your clutch clearance is correct. We want between 40 and 60 thousandths. So I prefer these kind of on the tight side because I want this clutch pack to come on before your input reverse clutch here comes on, because that'll give you a bang, because this will grab your drivetrain and start spinning it up, and then when this one comes on, it'll give you a clunk. So this applies to almost every transmission. You want your low reverse clutches to come on before your input clutches or whatever your driving clutch is for reverse. Next, this Torrington bearing goes in, and our 2-4 clutch drum. Now, as you can see, the oil delivery hole is here, and that has to line up down in here. You'll also notice there's a little cancellation here that's going to help you locate it. We have a return spring that goes on top of it. And then we have a snap ring that holds that into the case. And this could be a little bit of a pain to get in. So you want to try and compress it down, get it started. Then you could usually walk it around and get it in. When you think it's in, get in between these cancellations and the snap ring and give it a little bit of a twist to make sure it's seated into its groove. Now once that's done, we could put in our low clutch drum and our Planetary assembly. Next up is this sun gear. We get a little grease. We have this anti-clunk spring, and that's going to sit at about 6 o'clock. And then we have this strange pressure plate that goes on the bottom. And if you look, these have a wide space and a corresponding wide space here, and that's how they have to fit in. pressure plate on top. And we know this clearance is good because we checked it before. Next is our other drum. And I like to grab this down here with snap ring pliers. Then I could drop it in. Next we have this bearing. Next we have this metal shim gasket. And our pump housing. Now under here we have one bolt. We're going to have two nuts. These are going to go to 30 foot-pounds. Next, our pinion goes in. And remember that there's a shim under here. You have to engage the rear transfer gear as you put this in. And they're fairly tight on the spline, so you have to give it some taps. And these are going to be the same, 30 foot-pounds. Now on our axle seals, remember we got the left and the right. Now we have our front seal. We have this installation tool, but it's definitely not for a Subaru. It's like a GM or something. And I like to put some red Loctite on the outside diameter of the seal. Now we got to run a nice bead of silicone on this. And this is very important to remember. You have this little seal that needs to go there. In addition to bolts, down here we have 4 nuts that hold this together. And 2 of them you usually have to wrench on. I like to put some red Loctite on here. And a washer. And your nut. Once you have this nut on, there's little places to stake it. But between that lock washer and the Loctite, that's not going anywhere. Also very important, don't forget that rubber seal, and this is not something that comes in rebuild kits, so you're gonna have to reuse your old one. So we want to put our rear seal in. And we have this pipe. And you want to be pretty gentle with it. Now we put these studs in because it helps it get together more easily. Once again, this torque spec is 20 foot-pounds. Next, we want to give this thing an air check. And the seal is something you never want to forget, obviously. And that's about as good as it's ever going to air check. So now we're going to put the valve body on. Nothing too special to worry about here, other than going to hook the manual valve. All right, so when that's hooked up right, this piece is engaged into here, and you can check it by moving the shifter. Now, as far as bolts, the only difference is we have this bolt hole. It's a little bit smaller, so that's a bolt that has to go in first because it gives you alignment. So these two bolts are different than the rest of the ones you're going to be left with. And back here, well, we can zoom in on this, we have another small bolt hole. So when we tighten these, we're going to tighten this one and this one first. We have a ground that goes here in this bolt hole. And we have this feed pipe. And that gets a 10mm bolt as well. So again, that one and that one are first. And you'll feel it's got a little push to it, and what that is it's compressing that seal that's sitting between the valve body and the 2/4 clutches. Oh, looks like we have another ground strap here. And once again, this stuff's all going to be 90 inch-pounds. Next is the filter. And there's 3 short bolts, and they're pretty self-explanatory. Now all that's left is to plug our 2 connectors in. These wiring harness hold downs. And we're just going to put the pan on with silicone. There's a couple speed sensors to put in. Now we're going to put the input shaft in. Now we have our lockup O-ring. And the last thing, we'll take these 2 bolts back out now that our silicone is set up. And we can put this bracket back on. Now I'm going to put the filter on. And that's about all I got for you. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.